welcome back, as the case may be. It's my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Professor James White, who's a fellow of the Institute for Arctic and Alpine Research at the University of Colorado at Boulder. If you were with us last night, I'm sure you enjoyed his talk, Sustainability, Climate Change, and You, more for the general audience. When we invited Jim, we also asked him to do a more technical talk on his research, which is what we have planned for tonight. Professor White's areas of research include modeling the global carbon cycle, development of techniques for measuring isotope ratios in atmospheric gases, reconstructions of paleo-environmental conditions, and tracing of groundwater flow and recharge. He has been a member of several deep ice coring projects in Greenland and Antarctica. His ice core research has helped to show that large climate changes tend to occur in the natural system as abrupt and rapid shifts rather than slow and gradual adjustments to changing external conditions. Tonight he's going to tell us about his work about this work in his talk, Ice Core Stories, Abrupt Climate Change in the Future Sea Level. Please help me greet Professor White.
Thank you, Chuck. And I'd like to thank everyone. I've met a bunch of you over the last 2 days, a day and a half. Is that a day and a half? I remember. It's been a lot of fun. I thank Chuck. I thank all of you for inviting me to come here and speak and spend some time with you. You've got a bunch of really fantastic students here, and you've got a wonderful place to have. So thank you, and hopefully this evening we can have some fun with this topic and move on. A new button I found on the
You found it on your phone.
So when I was asked to give more of a technical talk, I sort of tried to balance technical here because we can go deep in the weeds on stable isotope geochemistry. And would you like to do that? No. I got at least one member of the audience who says, that's not good. So, but I will try to get a little more into it than what I did last night. But if at any point along the way I say something and you go, hold on, that's not making it for me, raise your hand and we'll stop for a moment and back up and make sure that everybody's on the same page. So I work in ice cores. I started working in ice cores a long time ago, 30 years ago. I'm not really fond of the cold, so I haven't actually been, really happy the last day and a half. But I have to tell you, it was even colder in Boulder, believe it or not, when I left. We spent some good time today talking about, ironically, a good friend of mine who's also on the Polar Research Board with me, Jennifer Francis, has a theory that a lot of these cold outbreaks are actually the result of global warming. It's called the Arctic paradox. I'm not even going to try to explain it, but just put that in the back of your head there. All right. I thought I'd start with some pictures. So what's it like to be an ice core scientist? We travel from Schenectady, New York, to, this is a picture of Kangerlussuaq, Greenland. That's the topography around here. Not any trees. There were trees, but they all got cut down. So there's not, it's pretty barren. It's tundra. There's muskox. Muskox are basically large, sort of like hairy cattle with a bad attitude. And they do have a bad attitude. You do not want to mess with them. They leave behind wonderful fur that you can make absolutely fantastic sweaters out of, but you really don't want to get anywhere near them to get that fur off of it. You want to pick it off, bushes and stuff like that. Anyway, this is a C-130 we fly in the New York Air National Guard does the flying, it's U.S. Air Force. You see the skis here? And so when it lands on pavement, the skis are up a little bit. When we land on snow, these skis come down, and we can land and take off. It's always exciting to land and take off in these things because one of the interesting reasons is that if you've ever been, I was about to say if you've ever been skiing. Where am I? Right. You know that skiing on drier, powdery snow, not only do you get better downhill, but also better cross country. what we've been seeing in Greenland over the last 20 years is more and more wet conditions. And these planes have trouble. So we actually fly at night. And night is the sun comes up in the fall and goes down in the spring. So it's not really night. But it does get darker, it does get cooler during this sort of traditional nighttime hours. So we've started to fly and do our work at night. This is what it's like on the inside of the plane. You'll notice a couple things. Everybody has earplugs. There is, the sound insulation inside of a military aircraft is like goose fly. It is loud. It is so loud that if you wanted to have a conversation sitting next to somebody, you couldn't do it anyway. So it doesn't really bother you that there's no movie, there's no service. This canvasy thing back here is hiding the loo. So if you got to do something that you pretty much are out there with everybody else. I have no clue what this guy's doing right there. It looks like he's having fun. This is what it's like flying into a camp. You see the runway's running like this. This is where the drilling's done out here underneath the snow. This was our home called the Dome. I'll show you more pictures of that. You see tents out here. This is where we live. This is another place where we live. But we have to spread everything out because the way the snow blows. If you put everything close together, you will get big drifts, and you can't do that. And so what we do is we tend to space everything out. That means you walk a lot. And you're already in, like the high of the day is maybe -20, so you're already pounding out calories just to stay warm, and you've got to walk on top of that. And we do work below the snow surface because when it does warm up, we don't want to mess with the ice core. So what we do is we dig into the snow, cover it over with a roof, and then work down in the snow. So the mean annual temperature is what you'll be working in. The mean annual temperature is about -30. See, so it doesn't really matter at that point whether it's sea or half. It's cold. This is the on the ground here. As the plane lands, they open up the back of it, and they do what's called cargo combat offloads. So there's some cargo. They just unhook the pallets, which are on the floor there, and everybody gets out of the way, and they call to the pilot gun in the plane. The pilot guns the plane, and the pilot goes zoop, right out the back. And that's when you hope that you packed your scientific equipment really well, because you have to be able to get rid of any scientific equipment you bring up there, unless you've specifically labeled it fragile, as it may get into a combat offload, in which case it could get bounced around. We've had some equipment broken. This is a typical day. The wind blows. You can have total whiteout conditions at the surface, and then look straight up and you see blue sky, just because of wind. I mean, this is, as you know, you live in a place that's flat, and when the wind starts cranking, there's really nothing that stops it. Here we don't even have the trees to break it up, so there's no boundary layer at all. It's like just wind. That's probably the one thing that drives you most crazy after a while. Is you just, would you quit blowing, please? It won't. There are some pretty days, and note the flag here is indicating that the wind is still blowing. This is what it's like under the surface. This was at a place called Northgrip. We've been here for about 3 years at this point. You see the roof we put over the hole. You also see that after a while it fails. And so this was actually kind of cool here for the entire last season. The roof kept threatening and hauling people in and out. The OSHA does not exist. Anyway, you sort of see that it's not a very good picture, but the drill is lying in here, and the drill is this long string of stuff that goes in and out of the hole and drills ice core all day long. You see there's some wet stuff on the floor. It's a drill fluid. Pretty Spartan. We don't really jazz this up very much. We're here to get ice core, not to really enjoy ourselves. Here's a picture of an ice core that's just got light coming through. It's kind of a cool shot. This is an ice core. This is the bottom of the Northgrip ice core, and this is when we started to get rock. This is the first sign of you've gotten to the bottom of the ice sheet, and you start to get rocks and pebbles in there from the bottom of the ice sheet. Typically, we stop there. If there's any electrical engineers in the room, you know that when we make contact with the bed, suddenly we have ground that we never had before, and so all of your electronic equipment goes. So you really don't want to hit ground unless you absolutely have to. This picture is here for several reasons. One is you get, and we talked about this with the students, one of the cool things is you can contact all these clothing manufacturers and you say, would you either give me for free or at a deep discount some of your stuff? So we contact North Face and Go Light and all sorts of companies. And what you get is what they can't sell, which I have on right here. So we got some nice red pants with a blue jacket. And the purple hat, my wife particularly hates the purple hat, but I particularly love the purple hat. It's been with me for about 30 years, and I will not get rid of the purple hat. The other thing that this points out is that everybody gets the lousy jobs. So my job this day, and I spent about 8 hours doing it, was these are actually fuel barrels that had fuel in them that we would refuel Twin Otter to small aircraft that would come in and out. And there's a hand crank you can fill them up, but you can't get that last little bit out of the barrel with the hand crank. And so somebody, being me, got to go out there, unscrew them, and dump all the little bits into one barrel. And so I spent the day soaked in jet fuel A, despite the fact that this is not beer. It is jet fuel A. And so I'm just sitting here enjoying my day. So everybody gets the lousy job. This is my day to get a particularly lousy job. Emptying the latrine is the other job I don't want. And getting out is always exciting. So these are something called JATOs, or Jet Assisted Takeoff. And if the plane is having trouble getting off the ice because it's overloaded, the pilot has a couple of options. One is to offload some of the weight of the plane. The other is to try these things, which might get the plane off. They don't like to offload things off the plane because typically we want to get the ice core out or the cargo out or something important has to go out. But there's always this debate inside the airplane. When you try one, I've been on airplanes that have tried 10 or 15 times to get off. And after about 10 tries, you get this kind of sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach because the pilot is going to either try this or he's going to start offloading weight. And you are weight. And so I frequently, about 3 or 4 times in my career, I've been thrown off of an airplane. The next one's coming in about 3 weeks. Right? So you were ready to leave, you're ready to go home, but back we go. We're going to spend another 3 weeks on the ice core. Planes come about once every 3 to 6 weeks, something like that. So you don't. It's not like every day you get a flight, regular scheduled stuff. Just doesn't work. Anyway, this is a good shot here. On the other hand, flying with the Air Force is fantastic. They're wonderful pilots. They're extremely good. They once took us down through a fjord, literally through a fjord. I don't think we probably had more than 100 feet on either side of the wingtips going down this valley. And the pilot's tipping over. He goes, we're going to let you look out the window. And of course, no one's in a seatbelt, right? You're just hanging on to the cargo strap. Plane flips over. It's a totally different way of flying. I did tell the students, I wasn't going to tell you this story, but I did tell the students, it's really funny. The TSA of the military is kind of humorous. You walk up to the little the machine that checks you for metal detector, and you're asked to take your guns, knives, and bombs out of your pockets. And so people unload, guns, knives, and explosives because we use explosives for seismic work up there. And then you go through the metal detector. And then you reach back around and you pick up your guns, stick them back in your pocket, off you go on the airplane. They just want to know that you've got a gun or a knife and explosive. They don't really care that you've got it. They just want to know that. Because you are not the only one on the plane with a gun or a knife and explosive. Anyway, all right, so let's talk a little bit about science. The last ice core project we just finished up in Greenland is called NEAM, or the North Eam Project, which is named after the Eemian. Eemian is an old palynology term for the last interglacial period. It's about 120 to 140,000 years ago. It's the last time that the climate on the planet was as warm, as a matter of fact, it was warmer than today. And it is our closest analogy in time to a warmer climate. We have not successfully recovered ice from that time period in Greenland because it's right down at the bottom of the ice sheet. And I'll show you the reason why, but when you get to the bottom of the ice sheet, all sorts of funky things happen. In one location, we had melting going on. And as a matter of fact, that Northbridge site, we had melting going on, and we actually drilled in and hit water at the base of the ice sheet. And it's not like, water's not uncommon at the base of the ice sheet. There's enough ice that accumulates to the point where you get pressure melting at the bottom. There's actually lakes underneath Antarctica. I was on an academy committee that basically tried to lay out ground rules for going into these environments that really we haven't been in for 30, 40 million years, something like that. It's been a long time since they've made photos now. Anyway, a couple of cool things happened at NEAM. I'll show you the signs from there, but one of the things that happened was, and this was our last summer in 2012, all of Greenland had a melting event on the 12th of July. And we can actually see melt events in ice cores. You can see because when the ice melts, the ice that's formed is clear. It's not bubbly at all. So we can actually see these melt events. And the melt events at this location, and I'm sorry, this is not marked, we're way up here at this site. Very, very rare melt events at this site. You know, maybe a couple of them during the last several thousand years. So this was, and we've been seeing more and more melting, but this is the first time we've actually seen melting all over the place. I wasn't up there, but the folks who were there took this picture. I've been on top of the ice sheet many, many times for about 30 years. I've never seen a rainbow because it never rains on the top. They actually had rain at this location. So they're on top of the ice sheet at an elevation of around 13,000 feet, and it's raining on them in July, which is pretty darn amazing. Anyway.
Excuse me, what was the temperature at that time?
During the daytime?
Yeah.
It was above freezing, slightly above freezing.
Just slightly.
Probably about, I don't know, 1 or 2 degrees C, something like that. You didn't get, wasn't up in the balmy category. It's actually miserable. No, seriously, when it's cold and dry, you know this, I mean, it's actually not so bad. You can handle that. But when it's cold and wet is when it gets miserable. And I never like being up there when it's cold and wet. It's just miserable. So why were we going to look at the last interglacial period? A couple of reasons. One is it was warmer than today by a couple of degrees. That is, I pointed out the analogy for the future. But the other important reason why we were after this location is we wanted to see what the ice sheet looked like during the last interglacial period. And one of the ways to do that is to recover an ice core that goes through the last interglacial period so we get an idea of, was it a lower ice sheet? Was it a bigger ice sheet? We didn't think it was going to be a bigger ice sheet. We thought it would be a lower ice sheet. We were talking about this all day with students, but there's 2 ways that we look at climate of the past. One is through paleoclimate. The other is through model, what I call model world, where modelers get together and figure out, okay, this is what I think happened. So the modelers have a whole bunch of models. They run like 500 or 600 iterations of this model. This is what they think the Greenland ice sheet looked like during the last interglacial period. This is what their models tell them. Given the ocean was warmer, given the atmosphere was warmer. Today, this is one big ice sheet. So there's a divide in here that perhaps no ice at all. There was a southern part and a northern part. And in their world, Greenland melted to the tune of about 4 meters worth of sea level being added to the ocean. And we know that the sea level was about higher by 4 to 6 meters at that time. So multiply by 3 if you want to translate. So the sort of conventional wisdom had always been that Greenland, being much warmer, was melting and contributing most of this sea level. And that was really the fundamental hypothesis that we wanted to test, was indeed Greenland the spot where this is coming from. We found a couple of things. One is, and I'll explain what's on this figure here. Time is, I apologize. Paleoclimatologists run time from the left to the right and the right to the left. And we're just sort of ambidextrous that way. So I'm going to challenge you. In this particular one, time runs from here's today, back in time 120,000. We also don't use negative numbers. We're not mathematicians. We can't struggle with the concept that time would go positive or negative. Anyway, here we are today. This is our interglacial period, the Holocene. You can see it's a nice, flat, relatively flat, long period of time. We talked about this last night. We've actually enjoyed a very stable climate for about 13,000 years, which has been very beneficial for us as human beings. We were able to develop agriculture and large societies around a climate that really hasn't been all that variable. Go back into the glacial period here, 20,000 years ago to about 100,000 or 80,000 years ago. And you see a couple of things here that are important. I'll come back to these, but you see these ups and downs. And when I first started in ice core science, there was a lot of debate about what these things were. And one of the first things that I did as a postdoc was we measured how fast this last, what's called the younger dryas, this cold period, how fast that ended. And I'll talk more about that when we talk about a rough climate change. But you see this is a pretty angry climate. And then we come through a period here, and then we come back out into the last interglacial period. So this is actually the record that we got. I'll show you how we got this. But there's a couple of things you can see. One is that this is considerably warmer than here. It's higher up, and this is measured in a parameter that I'll come back to in a second, the 018-16 ratio. It's a thermometer that we use in an ice core. So here's the change in temperature blown up. This little piece right here goes right here. So here's temperature coming up, crosses, actually zeros today, crosses today, and then it goes warmer. It goes warmer by about 8 degrees Celsius. So during that time, Greenland was about 8 degrees Celsius, so this location was about 8 degrees Celsius, warmer than it is today. Now there's a couple of ways that it can get warmer. One is it could actually be warmer. The second is that the ice sheet could have been much lower. Because if the ice sheet is lower, you're farther down in the atmosphere, and it's warmer as you go down in the atmosphere. Right now, this is at roughly 13,000 feet, and so it's cold, both because it's cold and because you're at 13,000 feet. So one of the reasons why it could have been warmer is because the ice sheet was lower. The third reason is we can be fooled by the fact that there was more summertime snow here. So this particular thermometer only functions when it snows. This is the 018-16 ratio of the ice itself. And so unlike thermometers that just sit out there and record 24/7, this one only records when it snows. So if it snowed more in the summertime, we would get a biased warmer temperature. If it snowed more in wintertime, we get a biased colder temperature. So we attacked all of those possibilities in this paper that we wrote. The surface elevation we can get from a couple of measurements that we make. The simplest one, but the one that we kind of struggle with at times, is just measuring the total amount of air that's in an ice core. And as you know, as you go up in the atmosphere, you have less atmosphere. And so that was probably our best measure. Now, it's not perfect. We argue about that. But we had a couple of ways to attack that. And so this is what we think the elevation history was. It was a little bit lower than today, and somewhere around 124,000 years ago. It was approximately the same as today. It's actually higher by a couple hundred meters. So it only went down by maybe 100 to 200 meters relative to today. All right, so that's important. So it was warmer, considerably warmer, but the elevation didn't change too much. Now, what that says, it was actually hotter at that time, and we can see that. This part of the ice core is full of melt layers. This part of the ice core has very few. Like I said, 1 or 2 predominant melt layers. The Eemian, the last interglacial period, was chock full of melt layers. It was much warmer, clearly much warmer at that time. So we had a little bit of a conundrum. Was Greenland really 8 degrees warmer? This actually is supported by a whole bunch of other data from the Arctic that argues that the Arctic was as much as 6, 7, 8 degrees warmer than today at that time. It was warmer because of the sun, of the Earth-Sun relationship. We had more insulation, more solar energy in the summertime than we do today. Greenhouse gases were approximately the same. So those of you who sat through last night, it wasn't a greenhouse gas warming, it was a solar warming. So you can have all sorts of warmings. And this particular one was a solar warming. But the surface elevation didn't change that much, which told us that the ice sheet up in that area, out in that neck of the woods, it's actually pretty much the same as it is today. It's a pretty big ice sheet. Now, what I've showed you is the result. Let me show you how we got to the result, because we had to get to it by a lot of machinations. One of the things that we found is that at the bottom of this ice sheet, there's a whole bunch of small topographic features that are probably triggering folding in the ice. The ice is moving along from left to right here. And as it moves along and goes over these bumps and wiggles, you begin to get sort of like waves forming. So those of you who sat through geology, you've seen these wonderful features in rocks. The same features you find in ice, only you can't really see them very much. Now, this is a radioactive, so this is We make noise at the surface and then look to see how the sound waves bounce off and see what we see. This has improved tremendously. That technology has improved tremendously for seeing what's at the bottom of the ice sheet. And it unfortunately improved tremendously from the time that we chose where to go to the time we actually got the ice core. So when we chose where the ice core was, we couldn't tell that these kind of features existed near the bottom of the ice sheet because the radios, the technology wasn't good enough. Now, later on they told us, hey, it looks like there may be folding here. We said, I'm sorry, we've already built the camp, we've already drilled the ice core. Now you tell us there may be folding here? Indeed, there was folding there. And this, on the right-hand side, is the actual record we measured with depth. And on the left-hand side is actually how we put it back together in time. So this is what I just showed you in that other figure. So here's now 100,000 years ago to 130,000 years ago, showing it's cold, it gets warmer, and it gets warmer. Off you go. These two pieces in here are actually inverted. Now, you might ask, how can you tell they're inverted, Jim? Well, there's a lot we can measure in the ice core. And one of the most important things that we can measure in ice cores, which make ice cores sort of unique from a paleoclimate point of view, is they contain atmosphere. They contain gases in the atmosphere. It's about 10% of the ice is air. Now, because the composition of the atmosphere varies, and because the atmosphere is very well mixed, we can go to a place like Antarctica where we can get this section of ice without any question of folding. We know it's stratigraphically intact. And we can get the record of methane, of CO2, of nitrous oxide, of the isotopes of all of these things. So we can get unbiased records of what the atmosphere should have looked like. And then we can go to Greenland and we can say, what do we see there? And what we saw was that the only way that this section made sense is if it was inverted, because the methane and the methane isotopes were varying over that time period. And the atmosphere doesn't lie. Right? It's because the atmosphere is pretty well mixed. What you see in Antarctica ought to be very, very close to what you see in Greenland. And so we had a way of knowing what the truth was and then unfolding the ice that we saw. For those of you who are geology majors, you know you got to do this anyway. You got to figure out how to unfold this stuff. Well, we in the ice core business, we're just learning how to do that. Now I'm going to try my movie player button. Gotta have one failure. This is a little movie that was made by a company in Denmark. And what they did was they had the ice flow, they took it over a couple of topographic features, and then as the, now it's colorized here, but what we think happened is as the ice is flowing along near the bottom, this is all on the bottom 100 meters of the ice, you get these folds that form that are stripped off the top pieces get torn off, and then you end up with pieces that are flipped over on their side. And here comes our drill. You want this move from geology? So that's what we think happened at this location. And we've got good evidence to show that that was the case. But this was this was the first time that we had a folded ice core and were able to unfold it. And we published this just recently in Nature magazine. So this is the lessons that we learned from here. I've already talked about some of it. We can reconstruct the what we call precipitation weighted temperature. So this whole business of summer, winter is working in the background somewhere. Shows a maximum of 8 degrees C warmer than today at 124 to 126,000 years ago. The insulation was higher, so we expected to be warmer, but this was warmer than we had expected, although there are a bunch of other records in the Arctic that support this. And interestingly, Greenland did not contribute more than 2 meters of sea level rise. So in order for us to be as high as we were at that location, the Greenland ice sheet could not have been terribly different than it is today. The southern part was probably much smaller, but the northern part was as robust as it is today. And you might ask, well, how is that possible? Well, one reason is you've got a lot of ocean out there. The Arctic Ocean at that time was ice-free, particularly in the summertime. So you had a lot of source water for feeding Greenland snow. And so probably what we think happened was that the ice sheet didn't really change that much because it traded warmth, which was helping to melt it, for additional snowfall coming in off the Arctic Ocean. That's the theory that we have right now. But it's relatively clear to us that there's no way we can reconstruct the ice sheet and get more than about 2 meters of sea level rise. It's So that begs the question, where did the rest of the sea level rise come from? And ironically, having worked our tails off in Greenland, we ended up focusing our conclusions on Antarctica. Because Antarctica is the other spot where you've got lots of ice, and the other spot where you could get sea level rise to come from. So, I showed you the slides last night. It still applies. One of the things we do know about our planet is a very simple relationship between sea level and temperature. When we have a warmer planet, we have a higher sea level. When we have a colder planet, sea level drops. And for two very basic reasons. One is water expands when it's warmer and contracts when it's colder, and also land ice melts. And there's a very powerful reflectivity feedback that as you begin to melt the ice, you get even more heat. So sea level and temperature is easily one of the most robust paleoclimate relationships that we have. When we plot those two things together, we see a very, very strong relationship for very good reasons, very simple physical reasons. This is an example. Now time is going in the other way. So here's today, going back 400,000 years. And this is sea level. I didn't plot the temperature record on top of here, but the temperature record looks pretty much exactly the same. Here's today, our interglacial period. Here's the last interglacial period. Here's previous interglacial period, marked with sea level at those times. And you can see a couple of things. One is, our sea level today is just sort of a random number relative to how sea level behaves in the past. 400,000 years ago, sea level was about 20 meters higher than today. 300,000 years ago, it was about the same. If you go back 200,000 years ago, it was about 2 meters higher than today. And if you go back, as I pointed out, it's about 4 to 6, 5 to 8, people give different numbers, higher than today if you go back 120,000 years ago. So sea level is dynamic on the planet. Right? So we know that. And we know it has to be coming from the ice sheet. It's really, that much sea level has got to come from Greenland and or Antarctica. That's the only place where you can get that kind of dynamic relationship. This is 20 feet of sea level. Those words are actually written on the ice sheet. It took us a long time, but we did. But we only got about 6 feet out of Greenland during the last interglacial period. So the rest of it comes from our good friends to the south. Now this raises some interesting points about the Antarctic ice sheet. So the Antarctic ice sheet is actually 2 ice sheets. This is the bedrock topography. Right? If you look at the actual ice, it's pretty boring. Big white flat thing. Right? There's East Antarctica, which is this piece over here, where most of the bedrock is well above sea level. So it's sort of a classic ice sheet. There's the western side, which encompasses all this area over here, and with the exception of some islands out here, most of this is below sea level. And you can't read the scale here, but this is 10,000 feet. So that's 10,000 feet below sea level. So it's not just below sea level, the bottom of the ice sheet. It's well below sea level, the bottom of the ice sheet. So the West Antarctic ice sheet is what we call a marine ice sheet, where the bedrock is well below sea level. Marine ice sheets are interesting creatures because the bedrock is below sea level. Now, why does it make them interesting? It makes them interesting because of something called the grounding line. The glaciologists talk about the grounding line. It's a spot where the ice is coming out towards the ocean. In this case, it forms a nice little ice shelf that floats out in the ocean. But this is where the ice, friction against the rock, holds the ice so that it can back up behind it. So you can't really grow, ice flows very well. You can't really grow a big ice sheet unless you've got some point in the system that stops the ice from flowing and allows the pressure to back up behind it. So that's the grounding line. Looked at from the side, what this looks like is here's your ice shelf, here's the ocean, and you can see this is well below sea level in here. So you can sort of, here's our grounding line. So you sort of see the grounding line is really critical. If the grounding line disappears, then you've got basically water can get back up underneath here and you lose your control on the ice sheet. It can actually start flowing out into the ocean. Here's an example of what we think happens in this situation. Here we have the ice shelf coming out, cold water underneath here that's not doing a whole lot of work in melting ice. As the ocean water warms up, it can penetrate up underneath here, then you start really eroding ice sheets. So it turns out that the biggest control on what we think now on the pinning of these ice sheets is not air temperature, it's water temperature. So what the ocean does in terms of the ocean circulation, what the ocean does in terms of its warmth. And the southern oceans are warming up. And so we get warmer and warmer water coming in and eroding this critical little grounding line. Now, this is important because, we'll back up for a second, as I pointed out, if we lose this frictional spot, ice can start to flow much faster. In Greenland, there's only a couple of places where you can flush ice out from the ice sheet into the ocean. And you can see those from satellite. You can see the big ice streams in Jakobshavn Fjord, and the big ice streams that go north, and I'll show you what that looks like. You can see these things on satellite pictures. In Antarctica, the western part of Antarctica, I'll back up here to make this point, there's a big window right here, a big window right here, and a big window right here, where there's really not much stopping the Antarctic ice sheet. If it loses its pinning line there, you have hundreds of miles of open throat, basically. And ice just starts flowing out. And glaciologists are at a point now, this is a wonderful message for you students, we don't know how fast they can put this stuff out. The models simply, don't have enough information in order to be able to calculate well just how fast Antarctica can dump ice out into the ocean. Today, sea level is rising at a rate where we'll hit 3 feet by the end of this century, pretty conservatively. Rates have been a factor of 10, 20, 30 higher in the past. And if the Antarctic ice sheet starts to lose its pinning point and starts to shed ice, it could easily raise sea level rise rates by more than a factor of 10. Easily by more than a factor of 10. Now this is important because 3 feet in a century is such that most of us are like, okay, I'll talk again about Miami, I'll pick on Miami again, but Miami's kind of toast. Because by 2100, Miami's not a functional city anymore. But 100 years is a long time. Even the folks in Miami don't get excited about 100 years. If it's happening 10 times faster, then 100 years shrinks down to a couple of decades. A couple of decades is the time frame on which we build and finance homes, on which we build and finance air conditioning systems, in which we build and finance sewage treatment plants. That becomes a societally interesting number. Maybe 20 years sounds like a lot to you if you're 21, 22 years old, but trust me, when you sign that mortgage one of these days for a 30-year loan, you're getting an impression of what 30 years is like. And if you buy a home and you expect within 30 years that home to be no longer functional because sea level's risen and takes your home away, then you know this is a bad investment. So, again, see where that works on this one. This is a little animation from NASA just showing the speed. So the reds here are fast-flowing ice, and the blues are slower-flowing ice. But you see this very large area here on the Ross Ice Shelf of very rapidly flowing ice. These are actually reconstructed ocean currents using satellite observation. The area that we're really interested in today happens to be this area out here called Pine Island. So along here, you have very rapidly flowing ice in here today because you have very warm ocean currents that are getting up underneath here. The other side of it, what's called the Roni-Fishner ice shelf, also has very, very rapidly flowing ice. I had to show this because NASA spent a buttload of your tax dollars putting it together.
Question.
Yeah.
If sea levels or the sea temperatures are warming a little bit enough to force some of that ice out, and if we really flush a lot of ice out, that in turn is going to cool the water.
Yeah, a little bit.
So how does it all play out? I guess?
Well, if you take a look at the Southern Ocean, there's not nearly enough ice to battle. There's a lot of heat capacity in water.
Question?
Yeah.
I don't quite get the idea of a grounding line because this is a physics problem when you think about the coefficient of static friction.
Right.
And if that's great enough over an area, it's going to be, I'm thinking about the friction large over an area and not over a single line.
It is. Basically what it is, it's a line that follows the topographic features, and the ice comes up and it bumps up against that. If it wasn't there, the ice would be flowing through the passageway. So it's basically a topographic feature that is stopping the ice sheet from keeping on going out into the ocean.
So it's a bump.
It's a bump.
Yeah.
It's a bump. And actually, the ice sheet feeds the bump. Because any crud that accumulates on the ice sheet, then when it comes down and melts, it dumps it at its grounding level. So it's actually a self-perpetuating process. So the ice sheet keeps adding crud there. So what's happening today is not only is it getting warmer, but with sea level rising, it's actually lifting up that little chunk of the ice as well. So both of those things are happening. It's mostly warm ice. Is that okay?
Yeah.
When you say the ice sheet is moving rapidly, how fast is that?
Ice moves at, 40, 50, 60 meters a year. There are places where you just saw that video. You can set out a row of flags across some of those large areas, 50 miles across, and in a matter of a couple of days, you can see that the ones in the middle are moving much faster than the ones on the edge. So physically,
Pretty quick.
it's quick. You can see it. Oh, sorry. So the question is not if sea level will rise in a warmer climate, but really we're focusing in on these two questions: how fast and how far. So how fast can ice? We don't know the answer to number one. We know that it's faster than today. And the real question is will it be fast enough for us as societies to really care about that? Because right now, at 100 years lifetime for Miami, we don't really care so much. So if it's a 20-year lifetime for Miami, I think people might begin to care. And the second question is how far? So how far will sea level rise? If Antarctica goes, how high up does sea level go? It's not going to reach 3 feet by 2100 to stop there. So I showed you this last night. Sea level is rising today by about a meter by the end of the century. It's not going to stop there. And this is without West Antarctica collapsing. So none of the 3 feet, the 1 meter does not include any problems with West Antarctica. This is what I showed last night. Miami really doesn't have much of a future beyond the end of this century. This is a city that, as I pointed out last night, you can go visit the last one on boats, you can go tarpon fishing, you can go fishing. It's a wonderful place. So you can ask a simple question in terms of the how far. The simple question you can ask is, what was the climate like last time we had roughly 400 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere? Thinking, okay, under that condition, what happened? Was West Antarctica gone? The answer was yes, West Antarctica was gone. So how high was sea level? And the Pliocene, about 3 million years ago, is the last time we think that CO2 levels were around 350 to 400 parts per million. We're at 390 something today. You got to go back a long way in time to find the Earth of today. It's about 30 degrees Fahrenheit warmer in the Arctic. There were trees right up to the edge of the Arctic Circle at that time. There was certainly less sea ice and there was less land ice, and sea level was pretty robustly somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 25 meters higher than today. So what does 20 to 25 meters of sea level look like? And by the way, from a paleoclimate point of view, so we conclude from this that if we let the system sit for a long enough period of time, maybe several hundred years, it will go up roughly 20 to 25 meters higher sea level. That sort of is a simple answer to the question of how high will it go. We don't know there's no mechanism we can think of that stops it and says, okay, I'm sorry, this time around because human beings are here, we're only going to go up 10 meters. Right? We'll let the scientists decide. No, nature's going to decide. Number of plots that look like this, but this is instructive. This is the global mean temperature plotted against sea level. And what you can see is, again, on our planet, we put a whole bunch more points on here. On our planet, you've got a very robust relationship between when you have a warmer planet, you've got higher sea level. When you've got a colder planet, you've got lower sea level. About 20,000 years ago, it was about 11 degrees colder, about 120 meters lower sea level. Here's the Pliocene point I just showed you, I just talked about. This is when Antarctica was totally melted out. Sea level was about 80 meters higher than today. And this is the last interglacial period here. This, by the way, is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change forecast for temperature for 2100. And there's no reason that we can see why this is just going to go this way and not this way. This point is actually not on the line. It's a tiny, tiny bit above the line. So it's really a question of time. You got to let the system have time, and it will eventually melt the ice off. So we expect, if indeed we warm right around this area, we expect to be up around the Pliocene level in terms of sea level in the future. So let's have some fun. Right? Relatively grim so far. Let's have some fun. So what happens with a world with 20 meters of sea level rise? All right? Thank you, Google, because you can go in and do this yourself. Right? You can go in and actually You know, we have got enough good topographic material, thank you to U.S. Geological Survey and thank you Google. This is Delaware with 20 meters of sea level rise. Delaware is no longer with us. Now, good students of Gustavus Adolphus, what was the first state of the Union? Delaware. Delaware signed first. On their license plate it says first state of the Union. There's beauty in here. First in, first out. Okay? You gotta have some humor involved in this, right? So here's Delaware. We're down to 49. Delaware's the first one to exit, right? First one in, first one out. Okay.
It's also where the first Swedish colony in America was founded in the 1600s.
And thank goodness they moved west. You know, thank goodness they settled around here. Okay. We talked about this today with students. The number one agency, the number one U.S. federal agency when it comes to spending on climate change is not the National Science Foundation. It's not NOAA. It's not NASA. It's the Department of Defense. It's our Pentagon, because they know that stuff like this is coming. They know that there will be refugees, and they know that these things don't sort themselves out elegantly. So they spend a lot of money doing scenario planning for this kind of situation. This is Bangladesh. There's hundreds of millions of people here, and this country over here, which is India, is not going to welcome them with open arms. And this country over here is not going to welcome them with open arms. They don't particularly like each other. Climate refugees are a reality for our future.
India's already built a fence to keep the Bangladeshis from coming in.
Good luck with that. There's some interesting spots, and you know, this is the Great Valley of California. There's all sorts of tomatoes and strawberries and all sorts of stuff underwater, under this area. 20 meters of sea level. So you can guarantee that we're going to build a dam right there in the Carquinez area. You know, we got a dam coming right there. By the way, so I talk in Colorado, because I live in Colorado. One of the interesting features of this area down in here is Oakland's a pretty low-lying area. And so Oakland Alameda County Stadium, which is where the Oakland Raiders play football, is gone. Underwater. When I give the talk to a bunch of Broncos fans, everybody erupts. I grew up in a different place. So here's Florida, here's Louisiana. This breaks my heart because I love the food there. I love the culture there. But those folks have got to move. Hopefully they take the food and the culture with them. Here's Florida. Florida, so we are spending billions of dollars fixing the Everglades today. Billions of dollars fixing the Everglades today. And it's hopeless. I mean, the Everglades are toast by the end of this century, and they're definitely going to be underwater in the future. Here's a key piece of information here. What's really important right here?
Disneyland.
Disney World. You were close. I'll give you a B. Disney World is right here. Turns out there were 20 meters of sea level rise. The Disney princess can sail right up here or down the Jacksonville River, right to the Magic Kingdom. Right? So Disney's going to make out like a man. Disney does not fly. Well, it's not a sinkhole, but you know, Disney's got this figured out. What I'd like to tell my students is, follow the money. Who makes out like a bandit under climate change? Disney. So who's behind climate change? I'll let you come to your own. All right, so I'm going to spend about, I'm sorry, I took too much time. I'll spend about 2 minutes talking about climate change, and then we'll take questions. So about climate change, I'll just move on here. When I was a graduate student, our view of climate change was driven by changes in the sun. And changes in the sun are slow. Thousands of years it takes for the sun to change. There's a precession to the orbit, obliquity to the orbit, eccentricity to the orbit. And this says in words what I was trying to say in the previous thing. In general, solar changes are slow. Thousands of years. So when I was a graduate student, when I learned about climate change, was that it took thousands of years to go from a glacial state to an interglacial state. It took thousands of years to go from an interglacial state to a glacial state because it's all driven by the sun, Jim. Didn't you get that? Okay, so now we got interested in this when I was a postdoc. Some very smart people in Copenhagen said, let's measure this core down here, which has very high accumulation rate, and see if we can measure on a year-by-year basis 13,000 years ago, which was the last time we had a big abrupt climate change. So it turns out there's enough accumulation in this location. You can actually see layers of snow that are about this thick that are 13,000 years old. 13,001, 13,002, 13,003, 13,004. You get the picture, right? So you actually go in and measure on a year-by-year basis what was happening there. This is, we're going to skip over all this stuff. This is the context. This is the period we were looking at. This is about 13,000 years ago. There's a bunch of these things. I pointed that out before. Time is now actually going from here in that direction. There's a bunch of these abrupt changes, and this was the first time back in the late 80s when we actually took a look at this and said, are these things real? Are they real changes? This is my good buddy Willie Dansgaard, who's since passed away. So this is a paper we published in '89 that showed that a 15 degrees Celsius change occurred in about 50 years. So when I started my college career lecturing to students, I would tell them that 15 degree changes happened in a couple thousand years. And their eyes would roll in the back of their head like sharks, like, you know, give me something I care about. When I told them it was 50 years, I thought 50 years was, you know, I could really get excited by this. Now, as it turns out, there are other pieces of it that happened in 20 years. I still couldn't get their attention. Now, I'm going to tell you that there are parts of this system, we've now dug into this even more, where you can get 5 degrees Celsius change, very large change, in less time than it takes to get through college. Does that get your attention? And trust me, the folks at Colorado are tough, because unless it's next Friday, which is their time scale of interest, they're not going to get excited about it at all. So here's an example. This is, again, the younger guys. We've now measured a bunch of stuff. It turns out it's about a 10 degrees C increase in Greenland temperature. We're off by a little bit. The snow doubled. It was cruising along at a certain level, and then in 1 to 3 years, it doubled accumulation and stayed there for the next 12,000 years. So accumulation goes, boink. In 1 to 3 years, it changed. There was a sea ice retreat in 1 to 2 years. Methane went up by 50% in 50 years. Methane is controlled by tropical wetlands, so it was a global feature that was going on. A lot of things were happening. 10 degrees C is Atlanta to Minneapolis. Right? 12 degrees C is Mobile to Minneapolis. So you're talking about a climate change that would take you from Mobile, Alabama to Minneapolis. Does that get your attention? There's a whole bunch of them. I'm not going to dwell on this. You can see we've actually measured, we have a number of different thermometers we can measure. These things range anywhere from 12.5 degrees to 10 degrees.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Is there evidence of massive species extinction that correlates with those events?
There are species extinctions that correlate with those events, yes.
There are always species extinctions. What I'm talking about is if you have a 10 degrees Celsius increase over a period of just a couple of years, you're going to lose a lot of species.
Let me come back to that.
Okay.
Okay, I'll come back to that. So, one of the questions we asked was, are these things real? And since that first paper, we found out indeed they are. This is now 2 ice cores, one here and one down here. So it's separated by a pretty good distance. In blue, you see one of them. In red, you see the other. And these are years. 50 years, 50 years. So each of these points is actually a year. So you can actually see the year-by-year changes correlate from one spot and another spot across Greenland. And what I think is even cooler is we've now measured enough of these things that we can see that this warming was, instead of being 50 years, was actually a step, a plateau, and a step. And each of these steps is about 1 degree C for 5 years, plateaus, and then 1 degree C for 5 years. 1 degree C for 5 years, this is going to help you remember this, is about 100 times larger than the warming that's occurred in the last century. We've seen about a degree in 100 years. This is about a degree per year. This is, so roughly half of the distance climatologically from Alabama to Minnesota happening in the time it takes you to get through college. And then when your younger sister comes along and goes, she gets the rest of it. So that's, finally I was getting the interest and attention of my students. There were parts of the system that are even faster. I'm not going to try to explain what the QMX is, but this is our what we measure in every ice core that shows us that there is an ocean trigger to this event. Ocean conditions and atmospheric conditions change, and they change very, very rapidly. 1 to 2 years. And this has been doing this for thousands of years, and then this does this for thousands of years. Okay? And so what I like to tell my students is, you know, when your parents, every parent tells every child, when I was your age, I used to have to walk through the snow, uphill, both ways, and, you know, kids would always roll their eyes at the parents and go, come on, Dad, it really wasn't that bad, right? Well, there really was a time, this is probably collective memory, right? There really was a time when one generation had to deal with a fundamentally different climate than the next generation. So there really was a time when a father or a wife or a mother said to their children, when I was your age, it was much, much colder, and we had to walk through snow. It wasn't uphill both ways. That's totally wrong. But it really was. So there really was a time in that. You know what? I'm going to stop there because we're out of time. And we can talk. I was going to show you some cool stuff about how you pull a dome around on the ice sheet, but we can maybe talk about that. But I do want to leave some time for questions, and I apologize for not over time. So I will wrap it up here, and I'll thank you so much for your kindness, for all the stuff you've done for me over the last couple of days. And for the students, yes, I'm going to get Chuck up at 4 a.m. He's going to take me there. Thank you very much.